Good morning. My name is Gray Demena. I am the president of Monmouth University, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Monmouth University Board of Trustees, the faculty, administrators, and students. Welcome to Monmouth University and historic Wilson Hall. In addition to Senate President Steve Sweeney, who is serving on today's panel and will be recognized later in the program, I also wanted to recognize another elected official and Monmouth University alum, Senator Declan O'Scanlan, who is with us today. We are here to host the first of a series of public panel discussions with this year's Public Servant in Residence. The Public Servant in Residence program is coordinated by the Office of the President, as well as the Department of Political Science and Sociology. The goal of the program is to introduce students to leaders in public service and to assist students in examining important public issues. The program has grown in stature over the years with accomplished public servants from former Chief Justices of the New Jersey Supreme Court to former governors and notable legislators like this year's public servant. Programs like this do not happen without the hard work of some important people on campus, and I want to thank a few of those principal people. Peter Reinhardt, Director of the Kislak Real Estate Institute, Joe Patton, Associate Professor of Political Science, and Paul Dement, Director of Government and Community Relations. They have been instrumental to the success of this program. This year, we are thrilled to have Senator Joseph Kyrillos as this year's Public Servant in Residence. Senator Kyrillos has a distinguished record of serving in the New Jersey legislature for almost 30 years before his retirement last year. He served as Majority Conference Leader and chaired standing committees on economic development and coastal resources. During his distinguished career representing Monmouth and Middlesex counties, the senator emerged as a statewide leader in job creation, economic growth, shore protection, and good government. He was also chairman of the Republican State Committee from 2001 to 2004, and his party's nominee for the U.S. Senate in 2012. Senator Kyrillos earned the respect of his colleagues on both sides of the aisle. It is probably how he was able to secure such great speakers for today's panel. We are fortunate to have the senator on campus throughout the academic year, and I hope students will take advantage of the tremendous opportunity to interact with him and benefit from his keen insight. I look forward to hearing from the panelists on today's discussion, an important one for the state of New Jersey. Please welcome Monmouth University's 2018-2019 Public Servant in Residence, Senator Joseph Kyrillos.
Thank you, Mr. President, very, very much. Now I know why you're the president. That was a great introduction. We're glad you're the president, and congratulations on what a terrific tenure here. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I've got big shoes to fill. The president mentioned some other folks that have had this role. I do miss the Senate from time to time. I miss Senator Sweeney. One of the things that I don't miss very much are the annual June budget marathons that we have. When we went through that last June, I was happy not to be there. It's very frustrating. There's a lot of paralysis. There's a lot of give and take. We seem to get it right for that moment in time and maybe for the year ahead, but not for the long run. And there's a lot of reasons why that happens, and there's a lot of underpinnings, which we're going to talk about today, that we need to fix. We're going to drill down on one today, the very high cost of retiree pension benefits and health care costs for retirees and for current employees. I know that people are very concerned, as we all should be, by the Judiciary Committee hearing in Washington, so I understand it's taking place right now, but we're going to focus a little closer to home this morning on an important item for the state of New Jersey. Let me start by talking to the students, which unfortunately are in the second tier behind some very distinguished trustees and faculty members and friends of the university. Let me ask for a show of hands, first of all, who lives in New Jersey? And hopefully I have some good constituents, former constituents that are here. Okay, that's a lot of people. That's most people. How many of you have heard your parents complain about property taxes or high taxes in general? Okay, that's what I thought. How many of you are thinking maybe later in life when you're through here in Monmouth that you might want to be a teacher or a police officer or a public servant, work for the government? We got a good show of hands, representative show of hands. How many of you, I'm not going to get personal here, how many of you are aware that there are some people here at the university that get financial assistance, or that the university at large gets assistance from the state government? Okay, even the president raised his hand on that. How many of you think, because New Jersey is expensive, or you have heard that it's expensive, that after you graduate from Monmouth University, you might actually think about leaving the state of New Jersey? Okay, that's a lot of hands. That's a lot of hands. That's too many hands for 18 and 19 and 20-year-old college kids. And that's why we're here today. No matter where you are in this debate, no matter where you sit, you know that we have to try to find a solution. We got an all-star panel of speakers to talk about this today. A little bit of an embarrassment of riches, led by the president of the New Jersey Senate. And so we're going to keep having higher property taxes, higher taxes generally, until we deal with this big pillar of the budget problem, the general budget problem that we've got here in New Jersey. So let me just put it quickly in perspective. And these guys are going to talk about why we haven't fixed it, what we can do to try to fix this thing so that we can continue to be one of the great states of America. We right now have, I think, Mr. President, a $37 billion plus budget. Over $7 billion of that money, 20%, goes to pensions for retirees or for health costs. If we don't do anything, in 5 years, that number will be over $12 billion in what we estimate the overall budget to be, 26%. So that means 1 out of every $4 will go to these costs. So before we pay for the public schools, before we pay for any aid or assistance to universities, anything for property tax relief, protection for the environment, you can go on and on. We have to deal with 1 out of $4 for this dilemma. And that's why we're here today. Beyond pensions, we got really high health care costs. We have really overly generous health insurance coverage, for myself included, as a retired state senator, than we can afford. We've got better coverage than the employees at Apple and Johnson & Johnson get. So if we tweak it a little bit, and we'll hear from our panelists on this, we can deal with that problem to a good degree, take that savings, and do something else with it. In fact, the coverage is so expensive. You all have heard of President Obama's Affordable Care Act, right? It's called, in some rooms, Obamacare. Well, in a few years, we'll be spending so much money, we'll have to pay a special tax to the federal government, a penalty, if you will. As a state, it was meant for the private sector, but it will hit our state government because our benefits are very, very generous. So we're not alone here. People might think, well, gee, Why is New Jersey so delinquent in this regard? Lots of states in the country have this problem. Nearby Connecticut is in trouble. Illinois is the worst. I think they spend about half of everything they spend on education, on teacher benefits. That can't continue. We got problems with our Social Security system, which affects all Americans, right? And we know that we'll have to reform it now that people don't die when they're 68 or 70 years old, and people live till they're 90 or 95, and we have to change it, not to hurt the system, but to save it for the students back here and for the future. Lots of problems in Europe where countries have made mistakes like this, and the big reason for the debt crisis in Europe is because of excessive entitlement spending. And you might think, well, gee, you can't compare New Jersey to a country in the world, but the truth of the matter is if New Jersey were a country in its own right, it would be a significant country in the world. Our economy is about as big as the country of Argentina, and it's a little bit bigger than the country of Sweden and of Taiwan. So there's a lot of history here. This is not a new issue, ladies and gentlemen. There's been commissions since I joined the legislature, not nearly 30 years ago, 30 years from when I left. Commissions in the 80s that Rich Keeving dealt with, I'm sure. Commissions and panels that I served on. Big 2004 Property Tax Reform Commission. I worked with Senator Sweeney on that. Tom Byrne is going to talk about a bipartisan commission that he led. And of course, the Senate President in a minute is going to talk about his big task force that has dealt with a lot of costs as well. Well, listen, this is about fairness, and it's about protecting the taxpayers, but it's also about protecting employees, teachers, and police officers, people at the local level that have dedicated their lives to serving the public, to being in the classroom, to protecting the environment. And these people, I want to say it clearly, they deserve quality benefits that will make their difficult jobs worthwhile. It's also important to have the benefits to attract good people to state and local government. There are many times when employees will give up higher salaries in the private sector to serve the public instead. Because of this, it's critical we balance the needs of employees with the needs of taxpayers. We're not going to balance, I'm sure the Senate President is not going to balance the budget on the backs of public employees, but at the same time, we should not be balancing the budget on the backs of the taxpayers either. And it should be said that your families, those not in the public sector, many people around New Jersey would love to have the same kind of benefits for themselves, health benefits, pensions that the public employees have. And so how can we pull this all together? It seems to me we can create a pretty broad-based coalition of liberals and progressives, because if we don't fix this problem, there's not going to be money to do the basic fundamental things that government needs to do. Forget about free college tuition, and free preschool and other important social initiatives that some people think that we need. Employee unions should want this, it seems to me, accept some kind of reform, because no benefit changes now could lead eventually to bankruptcy and no pension future at all. The majority of taxpayers will want it for obvious reasons that I've talked about. And the business community, and I've asked Peter Reinhardt to talk about it, people looking to expand jobs, looking for jobs, will see an improved economy when the cost of doing business in New Jersey is lower and it makes our state more affordable. So the reason I think the coalition can come together with a lot of different people someday when we have to do it is because at its core, this is not about philosophy. It seems to me. It's not about ideology. It's a math problem. This is a math problem, and we all took some basic math in school, and I think eventually we can figure it out. So, do we ignore these problems? Do we raise taxes inordinately? Do we cut big budget items in order to pay for entitlement spending beyond what we need to pay or should be paying? What's the level of benefits? How do we make this Sweeney working group that just came out with its report effective? And it looked at a lot of things, which Steve Sweeney will talk about. We're going to have each of these guys come up here, speak for 7-8 minutes, and we're going to have some time for questions and answers at the end. I can't thank the Senate President enough for being here. I think he arrived in Trenton in 2002. He served for 8 years. He became the Senate President very quickly. He's been the President of the Senate, which I want to say the number 2 elected official in New Jersey, but we have a lieutenant governor now, so I guess it's arguable. But nothing happens, ladies and gentlemen, without this person. The last 8 years he's been president, as I've said, and I think at the end of this 2-year cycle he will tie at 10 years for the longest serving president of the New Jersey Senate. He's an interesting guy. He's an iron worker. We got any families from trade unions out there in the audience? He's an iron worker, and he went on to be a leader and an executive in his union. And he was a leader on this subject we're talking about this morning, long before most people were aware of it, let alone talking about it. He's my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Senate, Steve Sweeney. You want to speak up here? Come up here.
It's your place. I'm doing what you say, John.
You need a big podium.
I am thrilled to be here, and Mr. President, I want to thank you for asking Joe, because he is a true leader in this state, and we have worked together. Joe's legacy for job creation and protection of the environment goes beyond anything that I can't. Joe and Ray Lesniak were partners on a lot of these things, but Joe was a driving force. And again, you couldn't have picked a better person, and I'm proud to call him my friend. And nothing against Declan. But Joe has classes for you, doesn't he? Joe, you forgot to give him those classes on how to handle yourself in the Senate. Please. But it's tough when you get a freshman. What are they going to do to you, Senate President? But no, Declan's a great friend too. But listen, I am thrilled to be here. Joe really pointed out a lot of things that are true. We live probably in, I think, the greatest state in the country. The diversity of this state is remarkable. From the mountains of the Northwest to the farms in the South to the beaches, it's just an amazing place. And the location when you're here in business, this is where you want to be. Problem is we have a major problem that we can point fingers and blame, or we can try to fix. You can say Republicans, you can say Democrats, or how about if we say both did it? Because they did. Government screwed the state up to a point where New Jersey, I think, is 48th or 49th in support of higher education, which now makes New Jersey the second most expensive public system in the nation. They're the investments that we want to be making. They're the investments we need to be making in order to strengthen our economy. People come here because there's a lot of smart people. That's why the economy is so strong. But our young people, and I saw the hands that went up back there that say, I'm getting out of here after I get out of school, is scary. Because, we spend one hell of a lot of money to educate these young people to leave here and strengthen the economies of other states that we compete with for jobs. So we're at a point in a time, and Joe, you brought up how there's been many studies, and a lot of them say a lot of the same things that we just did in this study, And I am thrilled that, a couple of the people that, when I wanted to put this panel together, it wasn't done by any legislative action. Normally you create a legislative action to create a panel. And back at the end of the year, I said, we are in serious, serious financial trouble. The numbers don't lie, and they're just numbers. You can't get emotional about it. They're numbers. So, we put together a panel. It was chaired by Senator Orho and Sarlo, bipartisan. Anybody that wanted to join in the legislature that called, we said yes. There might have been more Republican senators than Democrats. It was like, we were just like, all come. And we were fortunate because we really do have the who's who of government that was on that panel. That understand government, and two of them are here with Richard and Peter, that were part of this panel. And they gave an enormous amounts of time. And I just sat back and enjoyed the discussions because we didn't want to steer the direction. We didn't want to predict the outcomes. We wanted the truth. Now, by the way, I kind of know where it was going anyway because we've been in this path for quite some time. And every year we do a budget. And every year it's going to the world's going to come to an end and we're not going to fix things. And at the last minute, it's a miracle we fix it for that year. Well, this is about the future of the state of New Jersey. If we don't correct and come up with a new pension system and a new health care system for this state, we are not going to make the investments that we care about. I care a great deal about pre-K. Pre-K has been proven the younger you get a person, actually the more successful they'll be later in life. In fact, in New Brunswick, kids that took the PARCC test that had pre-K scored 20% higher than kids that didn't. Just stats, numbers. So we need to fix this problem. And someone said, well, you said you're ready to go to war on this. I said, I am. It's a war for the future of this state. Not today, not tomorrow, but for the future of this state. We can't raise taxes enough. There's not enough taxes to raise. We're chasing people out of this state. We're chasing businesses out of this state. I'm not saying you don't raise taxes, but it can't be a one-sided fix. It can't be you raise taxes and we'll push it off and push it off, push it off. No, the taxpayers can't afford this anymore. When the average property taxes are $8,600 in this state, and 28% of our retirees, our public sector workforce, leave the state of New Jersey when they retire because it's too expensive. Well, why do you think it's expensive? Right? Simple, they're numbers. We're going to consume about these guys got the numbers down better than me, but our budget's going to be 26, 27% of our whole budget is going to be consumed by pension and health care costs. So, Einstein said it, I guess, the best. If you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, it's insanity. How about that? I quoted Einstein. Isn't that impressive? As an iron worker, I quoted Einstein. Far from it. But the point is, we need to change. And this is a battle. When I tell you this is going to be a battle, it is going to be Democrats and Republicans joined at the hip, like we did in 2010, to fix the system. Now, I can tell you right now, I would love to sit down with the public sector unions and negotiate with them a new system. I would love to do it. I'm open to doing it. I'd love to have a conversation. What I hear is, you're not our boss. The governor is. Really? I'm the one that funds the contracts that he approves, so I get a say too. And we're going to have a say going forward. Look, we didn't put this panel together. When we asked this panel to get together, we told them that we're going to take this discussion well beyond any other discussion any other panel's ever done for one reason. I'm the Senate President. I can do it. And I'm engaged, and I have partners in the Senate, and the Assembly's open to change also. We're going to move forward, and we're going to fight, and we're going to fix this. Tom Byrne did a panel, a report with Mr. Healy that was a very good report. Numbers are numbers. We're not going to tax ourselves out of this problem. But I can tell you what, we are going to fight like hell this year, and I think we're going to create enough capacity that we can fix things. But what we need the public's engagement. We need the public I'm going to date myself now. Remember the movie Network? For some of the older guys, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take this anymore. That's the kind of energy that we're going to need the public to engage in. Look, I see people that have given up. I talk to residents on a regular basis, say, as soon as my kids get out of high school, I'm out of here. You just saw kids graduating from college, right? They haven't paid the taxes yet, but what they've heard, they're out of here. We got to stop this outward migration of our people. We need to fix New Jersey. And the panel that we put together gave us some awesome ideas. And some would say, well, there's too many ideas because we have that many problems. But the biggest one in the room, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is pension and health care. And I mean, you can look at all the numbers you want. I sit and negotiate budgets. I did 8 years with Governor Christie and the first year with Governor Murphy. You're not making investments. Like, we're arguing over $45,000 line items in a $37 billion, $37.5 or $6 billion budget. That's when you know you have a problem, when you start arguing over these small line items. Look, we need to fund our schools. We need to improve our schools. We got great schools, but it doesn't mean we can't do better. But we need to do it differently. One of the quick recommendations, and I'll sit down because others don't want to talk, is, and they say, oh, this will never happen. But it has to happen is, former Commissioner Lucille Davey brought to our attention the fact that, we have these regional school districts that send to a high school. And the school districts don't coordinate, some do, but the majority don't coordinate curriculum with the high school. So you could have 4 or 5 different school districts sending to a high school with the kids all learning different things. So when they get to the high school, they're not ready. And, and normally it kind of hurts them. I think a third of our kids that go to college need remedial education because we're not doing a good enough job. It's not that we're not spending enough money. So we're like, well, then you talk to regional superintendents of schools and said, hey, listen, it's not just that. We can't even coordinate calendars with these districts. So if we were to eliminate K4, K6, K8 districts and made them regional high schools, K-12s, you can go from 600 school districts to 320. And we're not taking your school away from you. East Greenwich Elementary School will still be there, but it will be with a principal, not a full administration, right? Like they do all over the country. Guys, it's like, it's a brilliant idea, but why haven't we done it? Because everyone starts to spin it that, oh, your child's education is going to be diminished. The former commissioner and some other experts on the panel said it will actually improve education. And that's why we lead with the fact we want to improve education. And, oh, by the way, we're going to save money. And if we save the money, maybe we can reduce class sizes even further. Maybe we can even improve more technology for these young people. We're wasting money. We do not have a money problem. We have a spending problem. And it has to be addressed now. And Joe, I came here, I am so proud that, that they made you the residence, the head guy here, whatever it is, what I'm here for. But Mr. President, seriously, you picked the perfect guy. He's someone that's respected throughout the state, both sides of the aisle. And I would have said this if he was still sitting in the Senate. This is not a partisan issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senate President Sweeney. And this is for the students back there. This makes it obvious that Republicans and Democrats, not just in New Jersey, but in America, we can work together. It can be done. And if we had more time, maybe another one of the seminars that I'll do, we'll talk about some of the bipartisan achievements that have happened, and obviously there'll be needs to be more to come. So thank you, Steve.
Just one clarification.
Senator.
I didn't do that to Gordon McGinnis. That thing on his nose, I didn't do that.
You didn't. We thought, we wanted, there are some press people here today. NJ News is here. We wanted to do we wanted Gordon to, get that bloody nose during the event, not before. No, I'm going to introduce Senator McGinnis in a minute. Maybe in the interest of time, I'll ask the panelists to just stay at their seats and speak from there. Rich Keevy's next up, and this is the guy, ladies and gentlemen, that I knew a tiny bit from afar when I first arrived at the legislature. He's probably grappled with these problems longer than any of us that are certainly people that are up here. Served as the budget director for the executive branch for Governor Florio. Went on to be the chief budget officer for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, nomination from the President, confirmation from the U.S. Senate. Went on to do the very same job for the Department of Defense, for the Pentagon. So this is a guy that has seen a lot, served in the private sector thereafter, and now he teaches not just at Rutgers, but also at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. So Rich Keevy, thank you for joining us very much. You want to come here?
The future of New Jersey is bleak. We've struggled to balance budgets for the last 20 years. We have the second lowest credit rating in the country and the second worst funded pension system in the country. Biggest problem in the state budget today and for the future is the very large unfunded pension system. Over $115 billion with an unfunded ratio of 40%. Three of the systems, for the judges, for the teachers, for the state employees, are due to run out of funds in the years 22, 29, and 34. Not a good prognosis. This year, we did appropriate $3.2 billion for pensions. It should have been much higher. And by the year 2023, not too long from now, we'll need to put $7.1 billion into the budget. I digress for a second. When the state pays for pensions, they pay for its employees and for all of the teacher pension systems. Albeit not as dramatic, health benefits have similar problems. We're at about $3 billion today. We're going to go to $4 billion in another few years. And on a much dimmer note, under any conservative projection of revenues and spending, in the next 4 years, we're going to be looking at anywhere between $3.2 and $4 billion of shortfall between projected revenues and projected appropriations under current activities. So how do we get here? Didn't happen overnight. It's happened over a few years. There's a lot of incidences that occurred, several big ones. First of all, many governors, starting back with Governor Whitman, failed to appropriate what they should have been appropriating in the pension system. One governor sold $2.7 billion of bonds to drop the money in the pension system. Not a good practice. Bonds at 7.6%, we're still paying off those bonds. $600 million is in the current budget to pay the debt service on it. We've had governors increase pension benefits, even though they are already pretty good. And we've had governors raid funds from the pension system in one way, shape, or another. So not good situation from the long run, and those over a period of time have created the pension shortfalls that we're looking at. So Senator Sweeney suggested this is not good for the long run. We need to do something, particularly on the pension and health benefits. And some of my colleagues I know will go into greater depth, but let me just quickly run through what we proposed in the pension system. We looked at three options. One that said, let's freeze the benefits of all current employees. If you've been in the pension system 15 years, you're frozen. All new employees would not go into the current defined benefit system. You'd go into a 401k type system. Second option we looked at was all vested employees would stay in the current system. Any new employees would go into a combination of a defined benefit up to perhaps $40,000, and then the rest would go into a 401k. We ultimately came up with the third option, a more benign option, I would say. Convert all new employees and employees who are not yet vested. They would go into the 401k, and existing employees who are already invested would have no impact. Those proposals would also affect local governments and school districts. So if we played this out over a period of time, we would be cutting back the growth of the pension systems at the state level and the local level. We also looked at the health benefits. So we had a lot of parameters there, but in a quick summary fashion, let me say that we have the most beneficial employee benefit system for health benefits in the country. And we're at what I would call a platinum level. Can't get much higher than the benefits we're providing for our employees. So our proposal, I think somewhat modest. We're not going to change the overall benefits, but we're going to reduce the contributions. And we're going to move it down to what was termed a gold level. There's a whole bunch of other options in there. For example, we have a bronze option that says, well, maybe you don't have to pay anything, employee, but we're going to be a system where you'll have more contributions on your part when you get your final bill. Various ways that we could attack the health benefits problem. The main thing is we need to reduce the overall cost and provide benefits comparable to other entities in the country. We also suggested that we would merge all of the school district and county college health systems as part of the state system to have a better return on our investment. And a little known but big issue, particularly among citizens, that we were going to cap the benefits that employees get when they retire. Under the present environment, people can carry over their sick leave at the local level for any number of years. People are retiring with $500,000 payouts at the local level. There is a cap at the state level. Our suggestion is to make that universal and to lower it. Final comment. Does this solve the problem? It addresses it and takes the curve down. But in my judgment, we'll see what the other panel members have to say, we're going to still need more revenue. So if you're sitting out there thinking that if we do all these things, we'll have the problem solved and we'll have a nice balanced budget, my bad news to you today is I don't think so. I think we're still going to need additional funds to address the infrastructure problems, the school underfunding problems, and a whole range of other infrastructure issues. Thank you.
Rich Keevy, thank you very much. Good outline of what's to come. I guess we have our work cut out for us. Where's Senator O'Scanlan? He's going to have to grapple with this. My successor has been a leader on these subjects. Another former legislator is with us, former Assemblyman, a former member of the Senate, somebody that I served with. We were good friends at the time, and we remain so. We've seen each other here and there through the years. Gordon went on to become the chief executive of the New Jersey Policy Perspective, an organization dedicated to advancing economic justice and shared prosperity. I think it's fair to say Gordon, it's a left-leaning organization. We wanted to get your perspective. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's mainstream. I guess it depends on your perspective. But ladies and gentlemen, Gordon McGinnis.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be invited. But I have to tell you, Kyrillos, Sweeney, and Rich have already covered what are in my notes here. So I'm going to have to be quick and accept much of what's already been said. And let's start with a simple statement by Joe Kyrillos, which is that the budget process is a squabble, a fight every year. And every year it's put together with baling wire and glue, and they sign the budget. There's no shutdown. Everybody goes away for the summer happy. And if you keep doing that year after year, you run into a few problems. And that's where we are. And we have to go back and put it in context, because what we have is a pretty well-defined process, system for putting together both pensions and retiree health benefits for public employees. So there are two sources of funding. The public employees, every 2 weeks, they look at their check stub, and there is a deduction for contributions for pension and health benefits. The other stream of benefits required to pay for those benefits come from the employer. The employer, in most cases, at least for today's discussion, is the state of New Jersey. And those payments by the employer are determined by the executive and legislative branches. So if you start off trying to define the problem, you can't do it on this year's budget, and you can't do it on next year's budget. You have to step back, and the comment's already been made. Until 25 years ago, do the math, that's 1993, New Jersey was one of 9 states in the United States that enjoyed a AAA credit rating from the 3 major agencies. One of 9. It's already been mentioned. Today, we're in the basement. And thank God for Illinois. If it weren't for Illinois, we would be dead last. Wouldn't that be a shame? We're only 49th, but we're working on getting down lower. How'd that happen? It happened largely because we're dealing with a problem that very few of us understand. Now, President Sweeney understands it because he's done work with the iron workers on pensions. He can talk to actuaries and understand what they're saying. Most of us cannot. And if you pick up an actuarial report and try and get through the numbers and get through the vocabulary, it might as well be in Tibetan for most of us, or Chinese. All right. So here we have a science which is supposed to set the ground rules, which nobody really understands. So if you have $70 billion in assets, for most of us who live in, even those of us who live in high-cost New Jersey, that sounds like an awful lot of money. And we're going to use that money to pay future pension benefits. Well, it turns out that because of the confusion created by the actuarial science, it's possible for the second stream that is required to make the payments to fund our pensions to ignore that. And it started 24 years ago. It's already been mentioned. It's worth examining how we got into the hole. And why is that? Because it is based entirely on governors and legislative leaders of both political parties over a 25-year period refusing to do what had been done prior to 1974. And they did not want to take responsibility for maintaining the standard that made us a AAA state. And that standard calls for the employer to make the payments annually to ensure that the resources will be available to pay the pensions which that employer has agreed to. That's a pretty simple statement. And it's worth remembering, and it's already been mentioned, that this hole was dug in 1994 with a budget that cut the income tax and did not reduce and did not make payments into the pension system, and that caught up 4 years later with a pension obligation bond issue. $3.6 billion, the largest bond issue in New Jersey history. But it's not like any other bond issue. Why is that? Because it's not a tax-exempt bond. If you have a tax-exempt bond, you can refinance it. You can go back to Wall Street. If the interest rate is 4%, but they're now 3%, why would you want to pay 4%? You go back, you raise the money at 3%, you refinance that bond, and you're set. You reduce your payments. You can't do it with a pension obligation bond. It's the only bond where that's true. It's the largest bond issue in New Jersey history. Guess what? To disguise the pain of not meeting the obligations with annual appropriations, the legislature and governor created a repayment schedule which was not noticeable immediately for repaying $3.6 billion. That repayment schedule will become very noticeable next year, because next year we're going to start having to put out $500 million every year for the next 10 years. Couldn't you do something with $5 billion over the next 10 years? That has been done by absolutely disregarding the responsibility of the employer over the last 25 years. That means today that any solution put forward, because we don't want to deal with the employer finding the resources to meet their obligation, we want to say to the public employee, the only way we can meet this is to cut your benefits. Now, if you think that's a fair plane to play on, I would suggest otherwise. I would also say, and I will close with this, there are lots of things, and Senator Sweeney's right, there are lots of things that could be done, that should be done, that in fact can't be done. And reorganizing government in New Jersey, one of the highest cost items is the fact that we've got so damn many school districts and so damn many municipalities in such a small space. And we have the provision that allows for that to end with a consolidation of school districts. The last count I made was we've got 610 school districts. Over the last 50 years, we've managed to consolidate 3 of them. This is based on a law that does not allow a district that loses money by consolidation to have to enter it. So it's the most complex solution available, and we shouldn't rely on it. But I would just say, and I want to conclude by saying, that the problem was not created by the half of the funding stream that comes from employees. It was created exclusively by that from the employer.
Gordon, thank you. Next up is Tom Byrne, leader in this subject area for the state. Shortly before I was the Republican state chairman, Tom was the Democratic state chairman. We have a common mutual friend. We decided jointly on joint Democrat-Republican state committee letterhead to nominate him to be the governor of New Jersey. That was a big deal at the time. Tom served on the State Investment Council. That's the council that decides where all our pension money is invested, how we grow it, how we make sure that we can have the biggest pot of money available to pay out these benefits. He went on to become the chairman. He co-chaired a commission that then Governor Christie put together to come up with a blueprint that could have us move forward into the future. It's been referenced, and it's a very, very thorough plan. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend Tom Byrne.
Thank you, Joe, and congratulations to Monmouth on having the senator as your scholar in residence this year. A great choice. There's a part of me as I'm sitting there thinking 2 things. Maybe I ought to just take credit for writing the other speeches and sit down, but what I'm going to try to do, it's interesting to me that on most panels people really disagree a lot. And I think one of the good and constructive things that's happened is people in both parties are finally, boy, this is a serious problem. We do have to deal with it. So when I served on this pension commission that issued a report in early 2015, I met with a lot of people. It was meant to be a bipartisan report. There were 2 other Democrats on it. Everybody agreed with the conclusions, by the way, maybe little nuances here and there, but we all agreed. But when I sat with certain people, they would start by saying, "You don't really believe all this stuff, do you?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I do." So I feel that if nothing else, I've contributed to getting the issue out there and getting the focus on it that we need to have. And I am delighted for the state of New Jersey that Senator Sweeney has the political courage to carry the ball on such a tough issue, and I admire that a lot. It didn't have to be that way. So I've seen this issue from 3 perspectives, as has been alluded to. I was state Democratic chair when these problems started, when the pension bonds just mentioned were issued. I would call a press conference to say why this shouldn't be done, and 2 reporters would show up. Reitmeyer wasn't there because a 6th grade teacher wouldn't let him out of class. And nobody cared back then. And part of the problem with this whole thing is this is a difficult issue to bring to life. Senator Sweeney said that every June we sit down and we have a battle and we solve $1 billion problem. And it's not so easy, but it does get done. And how do you really get your arms around the order of magnitude between a $1 billion problem and a problem that is likely over $100 billion? That's not the kind of problem that can be solved overnight or in a long weekend. And maybe the best analogy that I can give, particularly for the students here, is that for most or virtually all of you, your parents didn't start saving for college when you were 18, right? You have to start well in advance, and you have to have a plan to start putting money aside. And that is the essence of a pension system. And that's what just stopped happening, as you heard, starting, as our commission said, 20 years ago. And part of the reason for that, let me just try to describe the political dynamic, I guess, is that every year there are so many competing pressures to fund things in the state budget. There are groups that want to expand pre-K now. We certainly, as you know, could use more money for higher education, for environmental protection, for all kinds of worthy causes. And these are direct and immediate needs that everybody has, and they're banging on the legislators' doors and so forth. So that stuff gets funded, and anything that we think we can put off or wait till another day, that's kind of what happened. And when Governor Whitman ran 20-some years ago and promised to cut the income tax by 30%, there was really no plan to pay for that. That's kind of what started this, and frankly, in my view, a lot of our successors were like, well, she got away with that, I will too, and I'll fund the immediate needs, and we'll worry about this sometime later. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of how we got where we are. So let me address another question. Why can't I put a precise number on what the liability is or exactly when the money's going to run out? The short answer is it depends on a number of variables that we can't control. I can't tell you what the assets in the pension funds are going to earn in the markets in the coming years, and that has a huge potential outcome influence on the outcomes here, as does the state's capacity to put in the money. So there's a so-called actuarially required contribution. The state can't afford it. And so what the state is doing is ramping up to that required contribution in increments of 10%, so that by the year 2023, it will get to somewhere between $6.6 and $7.1 billion, which is what's currently seen as the required contribution. Can we get there if there's a recession? Who knows? And so that's the risk. And when I talk to employees, to state employees, I say, look, What our commission recommended was that everything you've been promised to date, you get. We made those promises, the state made those promises, we have to keep them. But what has to change is going forward, that we can't afford to keep doing the same thing. So in the time I have to simplify this a little bit, happy to take questions. But what we basically said is, as you've heard, health care plans for state employees are far more generous than anything you get in the private sector. In my view, we did not recommend anything draconian. We said, let's put public employees on the same health plan as President Obama said was the highest end of Obamacare, the so-called Obamacare gold plans. And we projected that could save $1 billion for a year. We said, let's recycle that money, those savings, directly into increased contributions into the pension system. We also said that in this day and age, it's simply not reasonable for the taxpayers to guarantee state workers that their savings are going to earn 7.5% a year when by and large other people's do not. And so we have to change that. And in changing that, we could save a lot of money. We projected somewhere around another $1 billion too. And that would also be recycled into additional contributions. We could have gone further and we didn't. We could have had cheaper health care plans. We could have said, let's just do what corporations do and throw people into 401ks, which is not an unreasonable solution, but we looked at studies that said it's better to still have the money professionally managed. Fidelity and others have concluded that returns tend to be 3% better annually when you do that, and so that's kind of what we came up with. So you've heard all this talk about increased expenses as this ramps up 26% of the state budget. Why is that such a big deal? On its face, it ought to be, but a point that I think wasn't emphasized earlier is that so much of state spending is so-called mandatory. And what I mean by mandatory is either court-ordered in the state, so the aid to the so-called Abbott districts, or federally mandated, Medicaid spending and so forth, so that discretionary spending is really a fairly small part of the overall state budget. And so the stuff that gets squeezed is aid to high schools, pre-K, aid to colleges and universities, which is why we have an affordability crisis in New Jersey. So I'm just trying to get you to connect the dots, that it's just not a pension crisis in isolation. It's stuff that affects you students today, and it's stuff that will continue to affect you going forward. If you stay in New Jersey, high property taxes and high taxes in general are an issue here. And if you want to become a public employee, you're signing up for a plan that is shaky, to say the least. And one of my concerns for the state is obviously for making sure that we don't screw existing state employees, but also we want to make sure that we can attract good people into the workforce going forward. And you've heard Senator Sweeney say that we can't solve all this just by continuing to raise taxes. And the unions would prefer that, and I don't blame them. If I were a union negotiator, that's what I would say. But at some point, taxing capacity becomes constrained because people do move out of the state. The IRS has data on this, and on average, over the last 3 years, we've lost about $3 billion in adjusted gross income moving out of New Jersey. And that is happening at a rate, when you adjust for population, at about twice the rate people are leaving the state of Pennsylvania for Florida, for instance. So for people who argue, well, older people go because of weather, well, taxes, I think, have a lot to do with it when you compare our out-migration to other states. So there are constraints. So for a lot of reasons, we need to deal with this. It's nice to see political leaders finally from both sides of the aisle coming together and addressing this. We love this state for so many reasons. The shore, the music scene, the proximity to New York City. We do have a highly educated workforce. We want to keep it that way. And if we don't deal with this effectively and soon, it may be too late to stop defaults in the pension system and so forth. So again, I'm glad that we have Senator Sweeney carrying the ball on this.
Tom, terrific presentation. Thank you very much. We have one more panelist, and then we are going to take some questions. And I know there may be some class transition at 11:30, Mr. President. But those of you that want to stay for a little bit longer, we'll have an extra question or so. We won't go too long. Peter Reinhardt, of all the good friends, and these gentlemen they're close friends of mine. Rich and I don't know each other very well, but the others are good friends. I've probably known Peter for 30 years. He was the general counsel of K. Hovnanian, which is one of the nation's biggest home builders, and now he is one of Monmouth University's own. He's the director of the Real Estate Institute, the Kislak Real Estate Institute here at Monmouth, and he was on the task force with Senator Sweeney, and he's well known around the state. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter Reinhardt.
Thank you, Senator, friend. So, two personal things about Joe. I first learned of Joe from my daughter Amy when she was a senior at Middletown High School South in around 1988 or so. Does that sound about right? Yeah, your first year in the assembly. And she said, "Dad, we just had this young assemblyman come and speak to us. I think you'd like him. You should meet him." And that was my first hearing about Joe. And second, on a very personal note, Joe's wife, Susan, who is sitting there in the front row, is responsible for me meeting my wife, Nancy, because Susan suggested that I get involved with an organization, Jersey Shore Partnership, and so I did. In the first meeting, there was this person, Nancy Byrne, who was the head of the New Jersey Tourism Department. And I said, So those of you that are interested in volunteering nonprofit activities, there are side benefits. Joe asked me to focus on the business concerns about this, but before I do it, I also want to say thank you very much to Senator Sweeney for including me in this very, very distinguished group. I mean, I'm a reasonably smart guy. I felt stupid compared to people like Rich Keevy and some of the other guys that were on that panel. It was a pleasure. I learned a lot. I added a little to this group, but we had about a dozen meetings from January to early August. We had subcommittee meetings on this stuff. I will tell you, hundreds and hundreds of hours were put in volunteers by this very, very smart group of people. And the recommendations that came out, while they are difficult, Senator Sweeney at the first meeting said, "Guys, be bold, don't hold back, don't worry about whether you think I'm going to like it or not. Tell us what you think needs to be done," and I think we did that. So I really thank Senator Sweeney and the others for allowing me to be part of it. So one other note, Rich Keevy and everybody talked about the $115 billion number. That's a lot, but let me bring it down to you. That's $16,772 per resident of the state of New Jersey. If you're a family of four, that's $65,000 you're obligated to pay just to pay for pension and health care benefits to public employees. Businesses create jobs. Without businesses, we have not much. People need to work in order to buy homes, rent apartments, buy things. Without businesses, we've got nothing, and businesses are very concerned about the fiscal health of the state of New Jersey. I have friends that have companies that advise businesses on relocating to states around the country. They say they pretty much don't even bother to recommend New Jersey because the costs are just too much. And just, let's say the 29th, 3 days ago, the Tax Foundation issued their annual report on business climates in the state of New Jersey, and once again, we were last. And we are not going to move out of last unless we address these problems. In property tax ranking in this report, we're not last, we're 48th. Connecticut is worse, they're 50. New York is 47. But the perception that it's just the Northeast, that, oh, we're never going to get out of it because we're a Northeast state, that is not right. But even if it is right, we can't sit back and do nothing. We've got to become a state where businesses say, you know, that state is getting its act together. They're addressing their fiscal health issues, and you know what? We're going to give it a shot because New Jersey has terrific assets. Our location is as good as any state in the country between two major metropolitan areas. We've got great ports. We have a highly educated workforce. We have great universities like Monmouth, and what's that one time that you went to? Oh, Princeton, and others. We have a lot of assets, but they're not able to overcome these other problems, these fiscal issues that we're facing. Businesses know that they don't vote. Yes, their employees vote, but they know they don't vote. And so they understand that they are an easier target for raising taxes than things like property taxes and individual income taxes. So just in this last budget, which we've heard described multiple times, the last, 7,212 hours, whatever it is, where you scramble because, unlike the federal government, we can't just have a deficit. So Senator Sweeney and Governor Murphy and Speaker Coughlin and others, they hammer it out, and the result, we got an increase in corporate taxes. I know Senator Sweeney didn't want to do it. Others didn't want to do it, but they had no choice because they have to have a balanced budget. Corporations and businesses look at that, and they say, gosh, again, it's the politically expedient thing to do to raise the cost of business. Now, if the state were a private business, how would they go about it? Well, they wouldn't be raising costs in an area where they're losing market share. And in a way, it's a market share issue, whether businesses are going to come to New Jersey or they're going to go elsewhere. You wouldn't be raising costs, and yet that's the very issue that confronts our leadership, our elected leadership, in what to do. Outmigration, Tom mentioned it briefly. A couple of very interesting stats that I learned as part of this working group. It takes about 90 joint filing taxpayers earning only $50,000 each to offset the lost revenue of just one taxpayer earning $1 million that moves out of the state. People say that the higher income, wealthier people leaving the state, I know it's true. Tom has clients, he knows it's true. We know it anecdotally. But here's the fact. 90 people making only $50,000 have to come into the state to make up for the $1 million person leaving. And if we have more David Teppers, who left, 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, $1 billion guy, it takes over 111,000 people to make up for the $1 million filer. To show another hemorrhage of our high earners, of all the taxpayers earning over $200,000, 21 years ago in 1997, 40% were no longer filing tax returns to the state of New Jersey in 2015. These are hard facts. They're numbers, as Senator Sweeney says. Property taxes, it's not the major topic today, but Patrick Murray's here from our wonderful Monmouth Polling Institute. I think every year the number one issue when he polls general issues for New Jersey is property taxes. Property taxes can't go down without the improvement in the public health and benefits and pension systems. The consolidation of the school districts will help. And there are other steps in our report that talk about addressing property taxes. We don't have time to go into those today, but I think maybe we will Monday. I think I'm going with you to the Monmouth County freeholders, and we'll talk about that there. By the way, Senator Sweeney, I don't know how you sleep. Well, you told me you only sleep 4 hours a day. But besides doing his job as Senate President, as the chief cheerleader for these fiscal reform things, he is on the road all the time. I would guess 3-4 times a week at least, he's at a public forum like this. I had the privilege of going with him a couple of weeks ago to the Wall Street Journal editorial board, where they asked hard questions, but they walked away saying, we get it. You guys are trying hard, so keep at it. Finally, I just want to add one other thing. I personally have been very concerned about the infrastructure deficit in this state. We are one really bad tunnel collapse away from economic Armageddon. If the Gateway Tunnel had to be closed, whether for a horrific collapse, but even if the engineers said, we've got to shut this down to make these repairs that were exacerbated by the saltwater intrusion from Sandy, or whatever, the fact that it's 100+ years old, it's unfathomable, unimaginable, the economic chaos that would call for our state. We don't have the money to make the significant investments in infrastructure because we have to pay 20, 30, 40% of money for public employee pension and health benefits. It's a very big problem, so welcome to Monmouth, and we look forward to your questions.
It's kind of a downcast report, isn't it? Are you guys okay back there? We're going to make it better. We're going to make it, because now we're going to take some questions. Paul Lemin from the university has a wireless microphone, so think of a question. I'm going to ask for a show of hands in a second. Let me just do a quick program note before people start to scatter. We're going to do a total of 4 of these seminars through the academic year. Late November, we're going to have a session, I think, in this room called Bridging the Partisan Divide, which, who knows, maybe Senator Sweeney will come back. I don't know. Probably we're going to let him off the hook on that one. But we're going to talk about how we can do better as a state and as a country, and start to get back to a level of civility that we've historically enjoyed, unlike what we see going on in Washington, D.C. This week. So I hope you'll think about coming to that, and then we'll do a couple things in the spring semester as well. And I'm looking forward to it. So who wants to start? Who wants to raise their hand with a question to any one of these panelists? It's been a good session for Senator Sweeney. That's why we set it up this way, so that everybody would say something nice about him before they sat down. Deservingly so. Okay, sir. You can introduce yourself if you'd like and direct it to whoever you'd like to have answer your question.
My name is Mike Schultz, a retired police officer from Long Branch. Do we have any thoughts of bringing the COLA back in?
We just basically turned the management of the police and fire pensions over to the police and fire. I believe the police and fire pension can come back. To be perfectly honest with you, I think it will come back in a few years. Not so with teachers or other sector unions, because their funding is so far out of whack. Look, the one thing we did when we turned the pension system over to police and fire is every member that sits on that board has to be a fiduciary, which means they got to make decisions that are actually sound for the pension system. And we also said you had to be 80% funding, and you couldn't take any action that would bring you under 80%. So it really can come back. It's just a matter of how they manage it. And Tom Byrne brought it up. Just so you understand, this has been the longest bull market in the history of the nation. We got a downturn coming, and when that happens, you're going to see a pension system take a hit. So it really comes down to how it's managed. But police and fire have managed their pensions over the years better than anyone else, and I would expect that they have a shot at getting theirs back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other question?
Let me just jump in for one comment. Other than the police and fire, I would observe that anybody who thinks they're going to get their COLA back is just in Never Land. I'm a retiree also, and I have a lot of friends who are retirees who think things will get better and we'll get our COLA back. If you just listen to the numbers, there's just no way that can happen, in my opinion. absent the police and fire who are run separately now.
And I just want to add one more thing. If we hadn't taken the actions that we took back in 2010 and 2011, the teachers' pension system, the public employees' pension system would have been bankrupt last year, 2017. That's why the COLAs were suspended. It was just, it's just like speeding up to get to bankruptcy. Police and fire, again, their funding levels have been dropping, but we really believe with proper management that they'll increase and they'll be okay.
Okay, thank you. Good question and important answers. Who's next? Anybody?
Over here?
There's back there, too.
We got one back here, and then we'll come up front. Hey, some student has to be kind of brave out there. Didn't we plan a question, Paul? Didn't anybody?
I plan one.
I'm teasing.
My
Bob.
name is Bob Allison. I'm a CPA. I have a question, and following up on what Gordon said, we have an employer and employee problem. Back at the time of Whitman, when the pension contributions were changed, if at the same time the benefit adjustments that you're talking about now were done, where would we be now?
Gordon, you want to take a shot at that? Rich
Yeah.
Keevy, you can go next after that if you have a thought.
I think it's important, and I intended to say this and neglected to. The pension system for state employees in New Jersey, when ranked against the 100 largest public employee pension systems in the nation, is 95th in the level of benefits. So this is not a problem created by a lucrative retirement package that goes to state employees. It instead is, as I just mentioned, near the bottom in terms of the level of benefits that need to be funded. So I think that may not be true on retiree health benefits, but it is certainly the case on pensions.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, Senator Sweeney.
And I'm glad you brought the question up, because in '97 when they did the pension bonding, just so you understand, the CWA and NJEA went along with Whitman in endorsing and pushing it through, as you remember, right, Gordon?
Yeah, I do.
And for that, they created a paper overfunding, Bob. This gets a little bit complicated, but they created an overfunding on paper. It wasn't real. So they decreased their contribution 40%. Police and fire didn't play the game. Well, you decrease your contribution when you really can't, causes a problem. Then in 2001, there was the mother of all, end of all, pension backbreaker, which was the 9% for all 800,000 workers with no money. So my point is to Gordon, yes, it was the government that failed to make the pension, but it was also the public sector employees that gamed the system. And at the end of the day, I was there in 2002, when McGreevey shorted the pension fund. And guess what? It was a wink and a nod with the public sector unions. There was no outrage, there was no hollering. It just happened. And over the years, it happened and it happened and it happened. The only governor really to put John Corzine started putting money in the pension system. And then we had that bad 2008. And then it's Chris Christie. And now Phil Murphy. But the problem is it's too late. If no one played games with the pension system, if we lived in a perfect world, the pension payment should be $1 billion. We would have had this year $2.2 billion to fund schools, to fund higher education, to fund everything. So I don't blame the public sector unions as a whole, but they were complicit in part of this act. And now we have to, together, fix it. Now, it's a two-sided solution. We've raised taxes to fund the pension. It's a two-sided solution. But we really need to fix a new pension system, and I'm not blaming them. I'm just dealing with realities in life.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Show of hands here. Questions. Was there a question in the back? No. There's one right here.
Yes.
Third row. Oh, okay, you got the microphone, and then we're going to come to the third row right in front of you. Go ahead.
Great. John Crosby, and congratulations for bringing this topic to the forefront and creating this grassroots effort to educate the public. A couple of years ago, Governor Christie transferred the casino or the lottery as an asset into the pension. What impact has that had looking at some hindsight, what have we learned? And do you see other assets perhaps being transferred to help fund that?
Well, I think in the long term, it's a good thing, and maybe Richard, you can address, because we addressed this on the panel, about we're asset rich and cash poor in the state. So Rich, would you?
Let me make two observations. When we moved the lottery into the pension system, it left a void, if you will, in the operating budget. So instead of appropriating, let me pick a number, $3 billion in the general fund, we only appropriated $2 billion because we had one in the lottery. So from one perspective, we just shuffled money around. From a second perspective, we did certainly guarantee for a period of time that we would have that $1 billion plus its investment return, so that's good. And second, from an actuarial and an accounting perspective, that did add assets to the pension system, which reduced the unfunded liability.
The one thing,
One other point. What the senator mentioned too, we did have a task force that looked at asset allocation. Is there a way we can capitalize on existing assets out there that the state owns and/or entities that the state has a role in, New Jersey Turnpike, Water Authority, so we could bring those assets into the pension system and think of an imaginative way, a proper way, of taxing or accessing that money. I mean, taking a wild example, let's say we brought some turnpike money in, raised the fees, and used some of that. Now, other people would say, well, that's just shifting money around. But there's a broader issue of adding these assets into the pension system, increasing the value, and then capitalizing in the future on the flow of revenue that comes in. So I think it's a good thought in the long run, has to be carefully thought out. I think the lottery move was a good move, wasn't tremendously dramatic, in my opinion.
Good answer.
the one other thing I'd add to that is that it gives a little bit more certainty to the cash flows into the system. Part of the reason we've had this problem over the years is that a certain amount had gotten appropriated into the pension system in the process, and it got paid the last day of the fiscal year. And so if there wasn't enough money toward the end of the year, they just went, well, we'll try again next year. And that's part of the reason for the shortfall. So now the lottery contributes money in monthly, and other money comes in quarterly instead of annually. So at least when the legislature and the governor are going through the appropriation process, the money that they're committing is a little bit more real because it's paid more regularly.
All right, good question, good answers.
Hey, Joe, can I add one thing on that?
Really quickly, then we're going to go to this gentleman right here, Paul.
On the assets, the one caveat I would put in is, as I said, I'm very concerned about infrastructure. Philosophically, I think you ought to trade big long-term assets for big long-term thing. Now, the pension thing is just such a big dinosaur. But if the pension thing was not, I would be asset converting to money for infrastructure fixes.
A commission led by Paul Volcker and Richard Ravitch that came out 5 years ago estimated that we have $140 billion of unmet infrastructure needs, and that number's 5 years old.
I was on that commission, and we understated that number because we didn't have enough data from the state to estimate it.
Right.
But,
All right, maybe we do an infrastructure panel. Maybe that's one of our
Great
next
job,
ones.
gentlemen.
Okay.
Great job, gentlemen. My name is Richard Pasick from Wall Township. I'm a financial planner for 36 years. I study mortality science and demographics. And I'm not sure for sure when defined benefit plans started, but I'm going to imagine it was in the 60s and 50s where the calculations were based on a CSO table, 1943, 1958. And the bottom line is life expectancy has increased dramatically since then. I have seen very low communication from the governors and other administration about the effects of increased mortality on the pension fund. That's the budgets are the budgets, I get it. But I'm kidding, but if people died on time back when they were designed, we wouldn't have a problem. People live longer.
That's right.
We needed to redefine the contribution limit. If this was a private company, we'd be bankrupt, would we not?
Any reactions?
But see,
Gordon, you did a great job. Just one comment on what you were doing. You're talking about 1994, we had a problem. Ironically, we changed mortality tables to the CSO table of 1990 in about 1993. And then all of a sudden we had all these problems. We went from 58 to 90. That's a dramatic increase. in life expectancy.
I'm not sure I can understand everything you said, but we also.
Not an actuary, do I?
I do.
We also extended the life for measuring what was required from 40 to 60 years, so that the numbers that would be required in any current year would be reduced, because you had 60 years with a flamboyant assumption of annual economic growth in the portfolio of assets to pay for pensions. And that was a part of the bullshit argument, that was made at the time to justify the reduction and the pension obligation bond issue. Professor Keevy corrected, I misstated the amount, and I apologize. It was not a $3.2 billion bond issue. It was only $2.7 billion.
We'll forgive you. We're going to forgive
Thank
you.
you.
Steve.
And so you know,
I did that privately.
that is absolutely the thing that's going to kill the pension systems. Absolutely the killer. Because I think we go with an 83-year, the mortality rate now is, I think they use the number that's 83 years. And they're actually grappling with this in Washington right now because we think the number is 87. You know, and whenever you add years that people are going to collect pensions, it causes even greater debt. And, you know, what happened here, the other thing I forgot to mention was they also lowered the retirement age by 5 years without any money. You know what I mean? So understand what happened here. That's what I say to people. Both sides did this, right? So we got to go back and dance again together to fix it. But the mortality rate's a major problem. And back when they did this pension deal, the $2.7 billion, when we pay it off, is going to cost us almost $11 billion. Think about it. We mortgaged our children's future back then because it was convenient for political reasons.
Okay.
there's
Paul,
one
you
way
have a
in the
woman
back.
in the
Another
back
question
row, and then there's somebody in the third row. We'll go to the back next and maybe close it out after that. Go ahead.
Nahid Aslanbegi. I teach economics at Monmouth University. In 2008, I'll give you an anecdote and then ask a question. In 2008, when the state had a budget crisis, in the midst of the Great Recession, 8 very bright students at Monmouth University put together a program of raising revenue for the state without reducing employment. They had very good ideas, and at the end, we tried to bring politicians from the state to take a look at it, just to attend the presentation. Not a single person wanted to touch this. Even the resident politician at Monmouth refused to attend.
Who was that?
Amy Hanlon.
Oh, okay. Oh, you meant Monmouth University. I was going to defend myself. Go ahead.
Don't be too sensitive now.
So my question to you is, what they were trying to do was peanuts in the scheme of things. What you want to do requires major restructuring and major changes in benefits. It will have employment consequences because if you're going to consolidate school districts and so on, that means reduction of pay, cut in personnel, and so on. How realistic do you think your proposals are? How practical they are? I understand what you're saying, and they all sound very good to me. But in the world of politics, especially in the larger context of cuts in taxes, cuts in corporate taxes, all states trying to compete to get the businesses for themselves by cutting, at some point, this is not going to work out. I want to see
So you've cut to the chase. So we're going to make a little news, Senator Sweeney.
I just want to know
how are we going to do this?
Yes.
Do we think you can navigate things with the other House, with Governor Murphy, and try to affect some of the important recommendations of the task force that you've
The way we are going to accomplish this is by getting the public engaged. You know, they're upset about taxes to start with. But we have to convince the public that there's hope that you can fix it. You know, I started a tour trying to fix school funding. that took us 3 years. But when we started finding pockets of groups that were underfunded, all of a sudden we connected the dots. Next thing you knew, we got it done. I need the public to be engaged because elected officials react to people's temperature. Property taxes are number one. That is it. Patrick tells, every time he does a poll, I could be Kreskin. I know what the number one issue is. Property taxes. We will not fix this state until we fix government. You know, and you have states that, Maryland, switched from municipal school districts to county school districts. Actually, they went from municipal government to county government. I'm not proposing a one-size-all-fit situation here. I'm just saying change has to happen. Resistance is remarkable. But once you make change, people say, wow, that was a really great idea. Why don't we do it sooner? You know what I'm saying? It works. I got a program down at Raymond University called 3+1, where kids can go to the county college for 3 years. The third year program's owned by the university, controlled by the university, and the fourth year they go to the university. 4-year degree, $25,000. No one in higher ed wants to do it besides Rowan. But you know what's happening? People now are saying, how come we don't have it? You know what I'm saying? So once the word gets out, and once you make the change, and once you really start pushing, it'll change. But we need the public's engagement. Without the public, if the public just continues to say we can't do anything about it, then nothing will get done with it.
Steve, you're right on. Listen, all this stuff is very politically difficult to do, or it would have been done. And like any good professor, I had a big presentation that I was going to go through, and we're going to talk about some of the politics involved. And in the interest of time, we moved through that, but we need that consensus that we talked about earlier. Because in my judgment, in our judgment, it's a math problem. So let's figure it out. Okay, maybe one more
quick
question.
observation on
quick observation for Rich Keevy, and then this woman had a question.
Quick observation. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rich.
Quick observation. 75% of all spending in this state is at the local level of government, not the state government, because all of the income tax money goes back to school districts, majority and local. So the big spender, if you will, in the world of state of New Jersey is at the local level. That doesn't beg the question of correcting state government issues too, but the spending is there, and the proposal that Senator spoke about with reducing the cost of pension and health benefit would also apply to the local governments.
You got somebody back there, Paul? All right, then
A couple students
we'll
here. A couple students
yeah,
actually
great.
have questions.
Awesome. Quick questions, and I'll ask the panelists to be brief in their answers. Go ahead.
Quick. My name's Allie Ganem. I'm a master's student here at Monmouth. My question is, like, as a student looking to enter the workforce in the next year, how do we get involved in making change in these policies and these programs, and how do we get our voices heard? Really, that's just kind of my general
Very good question. Who wants to take a crack at that? Anybody?
Defeated
Reinhardt?
politician.
I think if you want to be a leader, Ally, was it? I think we need students for fiscal responsibility or something like that. And if you could be the leader of that movement, start at Monmouth, go to Princeton, go to Rowan, go to these other ones, that, Senator, wouldn't that be
I think that's great.
powerful?
You know, started one on this campus, students for fiscal reform, and get Republicans and Democrats and independents, and you know, if you agree with what we're talking about in terms of this being math, not philosophy or ideology, you can get a lot of different kinds of people involved, and maybe some professors involved. Yeah. Okay.
Politicians know who votes, and students vote in lower numbers than a lot of other people. So you get that to start changing, it'll have an impact.
Good suggestion, Peter and Tom. Paul, who's next?
Hi, I'm Scott Rickey. I'm a junior here at Monmouth. With New Jersey implementing sports betting now, how does the taxes and how is it specifically strengthening our economy? What does it usually go towards?
Okay.
Well,
Senator Sweeney.
Well, it's supposed to be for senior prescription programs. That's what all gambling revenue is supposed to be. Sports betting is not going to be the big tax win that everyone thinks. It was really just another tool for casinos to bring more business. And when we talk taxes, we kept the tax rate low. If you go to a casino, it's 8.5%. If you go online, it's 13%. Pennsylvania's taxing at 35%. New York's going to do it at 50%, which means no one's going to bet sports betting in those states, but they might come here. So, again, to the term with taxes, people come to a location where normally taxes are better, and I'm just going to roll on this real quick. We just raised $5 million and up to 10.75. If you move to Pennsylvania, you pay 3. Not hard to figure out.
Good question. It's good we have it. We want to encourage all industries to come because we will get some job growth and some economic progress and some tax revenue for the state. So it's good.
I trust you're an Eagles fan.
Bob, you've got the mother of all questions. But listen, after you're done, what is your name right here? Michelle. We got to get to Michelle because I keep pointing to Michelle and,
Right.
she's going to
I'll
be
tell you
upset.
what, I will defer to Michelle for a moment, and then I'll ask the mother lode of all questions here afterward, okay?
All right.
Okay.
Joe, you have a student all the way in the back.
We got another student in the back? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Moylan. I'm an alumni from Monmouth University. Thank you, all of you, for bringing this topic more to the mainstream.
Go there, Nancy.
And that lends to my question. I do have a lot of ideas and things to say, but perhaps there's another forum offline to do
Maybe
that.
they'll let you as an alumni representative on this new task force we've suggested here
Maybe.
for the school.
A lot of what I see at the municipal level in terms of being a resident of Monmouth County and of New Jersey is the lack of understanding and awareness of how policies and change can happen, so to speak. Really understanding the inner workings and dynamics, going back to civics, so to speak. And presently today, we know that with the changing rhetoric in our current political climate and the divisiveness, I feel like understanding what it means to work as a community and to work as citizens together is really falling to the wayside, and that it's becoming too partisan, and that we're losing sight of what we really need to be talking about and what we really need to be accomplishing. So when you present these specific changes, and change management is very hard, but a lot of it is relative to communication and getting that message out and getting the right level of understanding and awareness around it, what are the biggest barriers that you face? Because this is a very personal and emotional topic. We're talking about people's money, right? We're talking about things that they feel entitled to, that they were promised to. Or we're talking about younger, more youthful residents who don't have ownership or a skin in that game because it doesn't affect my family, right? What are the biggest barriers that you feel in trying to communicate the need for this change?
Well, it's funny. People like change, but they don't want change in their town, just so you know. That's normally the big problem. I'll give you a real quick example. I have a town called Winona in Gloucester County that they wanted to merge police departments. And, the mayor figured they could save $400 per household. It was the highest property tax in the county. And they forced it to a referendum instead of the governing body actually making the decision. And the voters voted it down. So you know what I'm saying? Change sounds good when it's change to you, but change has to happen in any way, in any order to improve it. And no matter how you want to communicate it, you just got to fight through the anger and the hostility. I'm going to tell you something I learned. Normally the people that are protesting something are the minority. It's not the majority of residents. What I've learned, the majority of residents do not come out because they elected me to deal with it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm telling you, I learned this. I had a road program that people talked about for 60 years doing and no one did, so I finally decided to do it. Fix the congestion. 500 people, we're not going to vote for you. I said, okay, I represent 300,000, I'll take the odds. But not everyone wants to take that on. Not every elected official. You have to understand something. When you do something that people don't like, they don't like you. And people that get elected like to have everyone love them. I'll be honest with you. Joe's taken many tough stances. Declan's made many tough issues. And when you do it, you piss people off. But you know something? If it works out afterwards, people are like, why'd I fight this? This was great. So what I'm saying is, the people themselves have to understand that change needs to happen, not just for change, but to improve. And we can communicate that. And Winona, the council finally did it on their own. Republicans and Democrats did it on their own. And there was rallies out at the municipal building and people raising hell. Now everyone's saying, why don't we do it? I'm serious. I don't know why we fought this.
Okay, hope that answers a good question. Okay, we have a student back here, and then I think we'll have Bob wind it up. Is that right, Paul? Because it's like 11:42. So tell us who you are.
Yes, good morning. Thank you all for your time today. My name is Raymond Clawson. I'm a graduate student in the Monmouth University School of Social Work, military veteran. I have little kids. I'm a homeowner in Monmouth County.
Awesome.
I see we were talking about the future rise to 26% for the pension and health costs. Baby boomers, the youngest ones are 50 years old as of this year. So we have a rising, it's just going to continue. So they retire, they take their pension, their benefits, and then they leave because of property taxes. This is a major issue. In just the outlook, I raised my hand saying I want to graduate and look elsewhere. I mean, this is the major reason. What are we going to do about it?
Right. Well, I think we got a good Senate leader here. He's going to try to affect the rest of the legislative branch and the other political branch, the executive branch, and try to affect this thing. Who wants to? Anybody want to speak to this frustration? This
I keep dominating things. So
crystallizes the frustration that people feel out there.
I can see everybody's rushing in to answer this question.
Well, look,
but one answer you could do, which would have a difficult time flowing, we have too many governments in the state, right? So we certainly can attempt to try something in that vein. It has never been very successful. I lived about 15 years of my adult life in the state of Virginia. Everything was county-based. We didn't have all these little school districts, all these little municipalities. We paid our money to Fairfax County, and they took care of the whole thing. Now, that would save a lot of money. But, I don't have any crystal ball out there as to how that could be brought about. Some of the attempts that the senator's trying to make is going to try to bend that curve down. But the ultimate solution is, be so radical that be very difficult to pull off. And you also have to remember one other observation, and give my other group a chance to think about it, is we are a high-cost state. I mean, we have high salaries and we have high costs, and that leads to higher taxes.
Listen, thank you for your military service and for doing a good job in life. And there's some good things about being here, right? We're all here for a reason. Let's not forget that. This is a great state, a lot to offer. Rich just said it. The salaries are better here, but we need the government to do as well as the people are doing for themselves and what the private sector is doing.
And there's going to be plenty of jobs for social workers.
Yeah. All I would add is to try to reinforce what Senator Sweeney said about the importance of public awareness and public engagement. And part of that is getting people to connect the dots between so many of these things. There's no perfect correlations, but you look at our state GDP, it's growing much more slowly over the last 15 years or so than the nation. We're in the bottom quintile of all the states in the country. That directly translates to job opportunities, economic opportunity, and so forth. We get hardly any venture capital money invested in this state compared to, say, the state of Massachusetts, where the top income tax rate happens to be 5%. So connecting all these dots, and as I say, there's far more variables than we have time for today, but public education and engagement makes a big difference. And what Rich said about the local level and property taxes, that matters too, and we could do another 2 hours just on spending at the local level, and there's a lot that could be done there.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed a month or so ago, and I made this point. You cannot let this conversation be dominated by trade groups. The unions they're going to because they're the most immediately affected. In the long term, they're going to benefit, in my opinion, but it takes people like you and Ally and others. You finally have to come out of the backwoods and come forward and make your voices heard, because Senator Sweeney said it, the majority don't say much. It's time for the majority to speak.
If I can add one more thing, Joe, to that. Sure. What the interest groups know is where to exert maximum pressure. And so they have a huge amount of influence in primaries. And fewer people vote in primaries, and so the public employee unions have gotten a lot of Democratic politicians, in particular, up until recently, to toe the line on what they want. That's changing, and frankly, I think the dynamic has changed dramatically because the NJEA spent $5 million trying to defeat Senator Sweeney. You won by more than ever, and so I think that says to a lot of politicians that we can do the right thing without paying the ultimate political consequence. And so in that sense, I'm optimistic that the political dynamic in the state has changed for the better.
And I just want to say one thing. There's probably no one more union than I am in this state. I come from a union family. My income's derived from a union. I've never had, my kids, every ounce of food my children ever ate came from a union dollar.
Yep.
I am the most pro-labor person you'll ever find. Paid family leave, minimum wage, you talk about it, we do it.
Yep.
But fair is fair.
Fair is fair.
And what I've proven, because almost all my elections, I have been attacked and challenged by the public sector workforce. Yep. Almost every election. And I beat them every single election. Because the reality is, there's more of us there. I would love for there to be more public sector union people. We passed laws to help protect public sector laborers after Janus. But at the end of the day, things work out when you have a balanced table. This scale has been tipped, and I'm telling you, I'm ready to go to war on these issues, but the Army is the public. And when the public speaks up, it's amazing how elected officials respond. And if it's only the special interest in the room, it's harder for me to convince my members that this is the right thing to do when only certain groups are hollering. So we're in it together is a hell of a lot better than you're on your own.
Yep.
Very good. Listen, I'm sure all of you will agree. Full-timers beat part-timers every time. And the people that are the loudest on any given subject, an interest group on any particular area, they're at it full-time with a lot of intensity. And others are part-time. And so the majority that the senator's talking about, they got to up the energy level. Okay. Trustee of the university, Bob McGowan.
Here comes the introduction.
Media czar with the mega question, which is not planted.
Which is not
Which
planted,
I wouldn't
I
have
might
done
add.
because of the interest of time. Bob, go ahead.
First, Senator, I'd like to welcome you to the campus of Monmouth University. We've known each other for a long time. They couldn't have picked a better gentleman to conduct these classes and many of these panels. So once again, welcome.
Thank you, Bob.
And for Senator Sweeney, I've known you on the periphery over the years. I admire you for the stances that you take. As you just pointed out, it hasn't been easy, but you have won because you've had the public behind you on many of these issues. And it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing, and I give you a lot of credit. And for the rest of the esteemed panel that we have here today, thank you for coming here. Monmouth is always open to events such as this to allow the public to get a much better understanding of some of the very serious problems that confront this state. Gentlemen, what I'd like to do very quickly, and I think, Gordon, it was you who brought this up, this was not a problem if you go back 25 years ago. The state was solvent, and so was the pension fund. It wasn't until the Christine Whitman administration came along and started to miss payments or not make payments or cut benefits, or, increase benefits and then cut the contributions that this problem started to steamroll through. But I'm going to read you a very short sentence from the state constitution. The legislature shall not in any manner create in any fiscal year a debt or debts, liability or liabilities of the state, which together with any previous debts or liabilities shall exceed at any time 1% of the total amount appropriated by the general appropriation law for that fiscal year, unless the same shall be authorized by law for some single object or work distinctly specified therein. Except as provided herein, no such law shall take effect until it's been submitted to the people at a general election and approved by a majority of the legally qualified voters of the state thereon. I would argue, based upon the state constitution, that the current pension system is unconstitutional. You're increasing liabilities by the day because we can't even keep up with the increase that we're talking about, much less trying to solve the problem. But I'll go one step further. If you happen to read an amendment to the Constitution, which was passed back in 2013, this is under Legislative Article 4, Section 7, the legislature shall not pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or depriving a party of any remedy for enforcing a contract which existed when the contract was made. So here we have a conflict within our own Constitution. And I would say to you, when all of you are elected, not all of you, because not all of you are on the state legislature, and the governors that we've seen over the past 25 years, you're all sworn to uphold this document. And yet we violated it. And in the process, we violated the very people that we're trying to help. Look, I've got skin in this game as a family. My daughter and my son-in-law are both teachers. And I can tell you that this often becomes a topic over Thanksgiving and Christmas table because they're concerned about their future.
Sure.
Okay? They want to know why this happened. And I'd like to know what we're going to do to really solve this problem over the long haul. And unfortunately, what I see is that we don't have the political muscle to really pull this off in a meaningful manner that's going to solve the problem long term. And this is, in all deference, Senator, this is not directed at you because I know you want to solve the problem, but I don't see the political will overall to do it.
I put this back on taxpayers, to be honest with you. They need to get angry as hell. I'm serious.
Do I sound angry?
Yeah, you do. And you know something? You should be. I'm mad as hell. I tried to fix this problem in 2005. It was this big. It was right before it really started to snowball. And that's when they came after me. I had to have state troopers walk me through the halls of the State House because, people were just coming at me left and right. And my feeling was, as long as I can punch these people back, I don't care. But they said I had to have state troopers. But seriously, once the public engages for real, we're creating the platform. We're creating the platform and the argument to engage the public. You get the public engaged. I'm going county by county. My partners on this table are going with me because it's not Steve Sweeney, politician. It's government expert Rich Keevy. You know what I mean? It's Peter, government expert here. We're going to go to every county. Then we're going to the public. And I guarantee you when we go do public meetings, they will be packed with public employees screaming us down. And they'll stream those things to my members, so my members won't want a taste of that. But if we can fill the rooms with taxpayers, and public employees are taxpayers too, but people that all they want to do is fix it, I guarantee you we'd have a different outcome.
Well, I might remind everybody several years ago when Governor Corzine wanted to take the Parkway or possibly the Turnpike and have them go private and take the money and put it into state government. Those events were well attended. They were standing room only. So if you want to bring that up as an opportunity to help fund pensions, that's a sure way to get a lot of people to come out, because I'll guarantee you they will fight it.
So, Gordon, you want to jump in?
I have to, the clause you read about not borrowing more than 1% against without going to the people, that's the clause you read. That has to do with the issuance of debt. It's the Supreme Court, which we really haven't mentioned very often, which forgot to read that clause that you just read.
Conveniently.
Conveniently, and permitted the issuance of a ton of debt by the state without observing the constitutional provision for having to go through the legislature and then have it go to the people. And that's where the debt expanded enormously. So we now have $45 billion in debt, and about $19 billion of that has no source of revenue that is behind it, and therefore it's repaid through the general.
I didn't read you the whole thing because obviously